Today I'm going to be sharing with you the 5 books that I would sell my soul to read for the first time again. That's a long title. I also feel like sell my soul is pretty dramatic, but I couldn't think of another metaphor. But basically, I'm going to be telling you the books that I would love to experience for the first time all over again. Sometimes as a reader, you get like book envy, where you see someone reading a book that you've already read and you're like jealous of them because they're getting to experience it for the first time and it was such a good book and you enjoyed it so much that you want to experience that magic of falling in love with the book all over again. So that's what we're talking about in this video. Grab yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, your drink of choice, and let's get into it. Also, if you can hear weird noises in the background, my dog Muka is currently rolling around on the carpet. He's having a moment, so yeah, if you hear that, I apologise. Are you done? Okay, let's get into it. So the first book that I would sell my soul to read again for the first time is Circe by Madeline Miller. If you know me, then you know that I am obsessed with this book. I read it last year on holiday and I just fell so deeply in love with it so fast. Let me give you a little synopsis. Circe is the retelling of a classic Greek mythology story about the goddess Circe. She's the daughter of Helios, who is the sun god, and Circe herself doesn't really seem to have any particularly interesting or outstanding powers, unlike her siblings and the rest of her family. She also isn't particularly beautiful or really special in any way, so for that reason she is kind of shunned and left out of her family. She's actually given the name Circe because in Greek Circe means bird and she has a hawk-like scratchy voice, so that's why she's given her name. However, Circe soon discovers that she actually does have some pretty miraculous powers. She is in fact a witch. She ends up using these powers and gets herself into a little bit of trouble, and eventually as punishment she is banished to a deserted island to fend for herself. Let me talk about why I love this book. This book is such a great exploration and depiction of a woman that is exploring her dark and divine feminine energy. Circe is stepping into her true self and harnessing her natural powers as a woman. Now yes, this is a story about a goddess, so obviously it's a little bit over the top, but actually I think any woman can relate to that feeling of really just owning yourself, being comfortable in your own skin and like harnessing your own innate powers as a woman. That is just such a powerful thing to do, and in this novel that is what Circe really does. She really transforms, you know, she sheds her old skin. She stops trying to be like everyone else. She stops comparing herself to her siblings and everyone else, and she's just like, this is who I am and I'm going to fend for myself, and no matter what comes my way I'm going to deal with it and I'm going to overcome it. What I also love about this book is the imagery is so vivid and rich. The colours seem really vibrant. It's just, you can really imagine it in this really vibrant way. I think there's really great messages in there, particularly for women, I was going to say young women, but really any women that picks up this book, because Circe goes through so much hardship in her life. She comes up against so many challenges and time again she is able to overcome them, and she really learns to trust and depend on herself, and in this way she really takes her own power back. And I just think it's an absolutely beautiful book. I just read it last year and I already can't wait to reread it, so if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend. The second book I'm going to talk about is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Now, if you've been living under a rock and you don't know what The Hunger Games is, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis. So The Hunger Games is set in a dystopian universe. We are in the nation of Panem, and that is split up into 12 districts. And every year, 2 people from these districts are selected at random to compete in the Hunger Games, which is basically a survival game that is televised and only one person can win. It's down to the last man standing, and the people in these games have to do whatever they need to do by any means necessary to ensure that they are the last one left alive, and that is the only way that they can get out of the games. So this is a series, it's a trilogy, and in these books we follow the protagonist Katniss Everdeen as she battles through the Hunger Games and tries to protect her family. So let me talk about why I love the Hunger Games. I read the Hunger Games when I was like, I think I was like 20 or 21. I was in college for sure. I have distinct memories of reading this series and I just absolutely love it. And I don't read a lot of YA or a lot of like, I would say dystopian or kind of like sci-fi fiction, but I just absolutely loved this, and I think the reason I loved it so much is it didn't depend on like a love story or anything like that. Like I really don't like books that revolve around love story. Yes, there was romantic elements in the books, but the main body of the book is made up of action. It's just such an interesting, albeit morbid concept. I just found it so fascinating. I also think, again, for like a YA series, that all the characters are really well fleshed out, and though they might not seem that way on the surface, they might seem a bit one-dimensional, the further that you get into the books, you really start to like peel back the layers on all these characters. My favourite character is Effie Trinket. I think she has a really interesting character arc because she starts off seeming quite one-dimensional. She's one of the people from the capital and she's very materialistic, and it just seems like there's not much to her, but as you really get into the books you really start to see that she struggles with what she stands for, especially by the end. She's very conflicted about her place in the capital and her allegiance to it. One thing that I find absolutely fascinating, and I don't actually know if this is true, I haven't looked up to see if it is true, right, but I heard that Suzanne Collins came up with the idea for this series of books when she was channel hopping between the news about the war in Iraq, I think it was the war in Iraq, and episodes of the reality TV show Big Brother. And in her mind, as she was like falling asleep, the two concepts overlapped, and that's how she came up with the idea for the Hunger Games. I think that's so interesting. And also, this might seem a little bit morbid, but honestly, in this day and age, I don't see the Hunger Games as being so unrealistic. I mean, it seems like the government will do pretty much anything to try and keep us in line. First I started reading it, I was like, wow, this is so barbaric and unrealistic, and now I'm like, is it though? Is it though? I just love this series of books. I think they're awesome. If you haven't read The Hunger Games, if you've maybe watched the movies but you haven't read the books, I would highly recommend reading the books. So the next book I'm going to talk about, I actually have a physical copy of. It is The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now this was my first Stephen King novel that I'd ever read, and I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I started off this one. I feel like I started off really strong because this is a great book. We follow a death row supervisor called Paul. In the film, Tom Hanks plays Paul, and his encounters with an inmate called John Coffey, and we discover that John Coffey has supernatural healing abilities. There's a lot of magical realism in this book. So in this book the main theme is death, and Stephen King really explores how people deal with the prospect of their own death. You know, it's set on death row, and I think to most of us in everyday life, death can almost seem a little bit abstract. It seems like something that it's just not really in our everyday lives, hopefully. However, in a place like death row, it is something that the inmates are confronted with every single day. Not just the inmates, you know, people that work there, families that visit there. It's something that is, I assume, very much on the forefront of their minds. So I just found this a really interesting and thought-provoking concept, and the character of John Coffey is really interesting as well. He's this big, burly, kind of scary seeming death row inmate, but actually he has these beautiful healing abilities. He actually helps a lot of people, including one of the main characters, Paul. So he really shows his vulnerable and sensitive side, and by the end of it you're left feeling really sad that he's actually on death row. So yeah, it just has a lot of like really thought-provoking elements to it. It's just a book that makes you think a lot. There's also one scene in it, and again, if you've read this book or if you've seen the film, you'll know the scene I'm talking about, but this scene is permanently scarred into my brain. It was probably one of the most horrific things I've ever read. So thanks for that, Stephen King. But yeah, if you haven't read this book, I'd highly recommend going and reading it and then watch the film, because the film is, I would honestly say, the best book to film adaptation I've ever seen. It's perfect. I can't fault it. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So Where the Crawdads Sing is a murder mystery, and we follow the main character Kaya, or as she's often referred to, the Marsh Girl. Kaya is a girl that has grown up in the marshlands of North Carolina all her life, and she is really shunned by the community. I'm sensing a theme of like characters I seem to like these characters that are like shunned by society and go off and do their own thing. So Kaya is shunned by her community. She tends to keep to herself, but suddenly she finds herself at the centre of a murder investigation. This book is absolutely stunning. I felt like reading this book, all of my senses were engaged. I felt like I could smell the food that Kaya cooks. I felt like I could feel the bird's feathers that she collects. I felt like I could see the images that she sees and hear the sounds of the marsh. It was so immersive. I don't know how the author did that, but it was it was just stunning. Kaya, the protagonist, has such a hard life. She encounters so many horrendous things, and she's, you know, abandoned at such a young age by her mother and then father. So she has a really rough start. She goes through a lot of hardships, but again, she's so resilient and she is so true to herself the whole time throughout this book, and she does whatever she needs to do to cultivate her inner peace and to not let that be taken away from her, and I just absolutely love that. I would say it's a story of survival and also defending your peace. Okay, the last book I'm going to talk about is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. This is Lucy Foley's third book, I believe. She also wrote The Guest List and The Hunting Party, and I think Lucy Foley is one of these authors that is just gonna get better and better. So The Paris Apartment is a sort of crime thriller mystery, and it centres around the character of a British journalist called Ben Daniels. He moves to Paris, he's working on a story, and he mysteriously disappears after someone breaks into his apartment. His half-sister Jess is on her way from England to stay with Ben for a little while, and she turns up at his apartment, obviously discovers he's not there, and ends up consumed by this mystery and trying to find out what happened to Ben. So as I said, Lucy Foley is an absolute master of this genre. I have loved every single book she's put out so far. What I love most about Lucy Foley's writing is she really uses the landscape or the setting for her books as a character within itself, and the apartment building in which Ben is living has such a looming and mysterious presence throughout this book. It really feels like a character in its own right. And also the cast of characters are so different from each other, which, you know, is typical of any sort of murder mystery. You had the sort of like posh boy, you had the rich older couple, you had the young party girls, you had Jess, the main character, who was a little bit downtrodden, had a little bit of a hard life, and they were all just so different from such different backgrounds, so it made for really interesting reading when they're interacting with each other, because they're just all coming from different places and points of views and different motives, and it was just really interesting to read. And Lucy Foley gives you just enough like little breadcrumbs to start piecing together parts of the story, and she helps you connect the dots just enough but still leaves so much room for some really good twists and turns. I am so excited to see what Lucy Foley does next, because as I say, this is the third book of hers that I've read, and I just feel like she just keeps getting better and better. So yeah, those are the 5 books that I would sell my soul to read for the first time again. If you haven't read any of them, highly recommend it, and if you have, let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you like this kind of bookish content, then again, please let me know in the comments. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.